Our last questioner is Secretary Lehman.
Thank you. I have two questions. One, recently the Commission visited JFK to review the microphone, please. Recently, the Commission visited JFK Airport to review INS procedures in the wake of 9/11 and the consolidation under Homeland Security. We were amazed to find that those illegals that were able to successfully get through the two screens, first the INS screen and then the customs screen, and make it through the sliding doors were home free. In that New York City and the Port Authority police and all other police forces are essentially prohibited from cooperating with INS. And similar municipal laws are enforced in other places, particularly in the South and West. Do any of you have any recommendations about what we should recommend to deal with this this real anomaly? I mean, you could argue about the laws may be too tough, but if the laws are in one jurisdiction prohibit the enforcement of federal law in immigration, that creates the breakdown of the rule of law. So what would you recommend, if anything?
I just want to make a comment. I used to feel very strongly that state and local police should basically help enforce immigration laws. When I lived and taught in Los Angeles, I had an opportunity to come to know some of the Los Angeles area local police and some of the policymakers there. What I would say is, before making any recommendation in this regard, it's really important to listen, to seriously consider what local police has to say. What I frequently heard was that enforcing immigration laws comes at a cost, and that we are left footing the bill for in other words, the federal government does not help us carry the cost of the extra manpower and energy and resources that would go into inspecting alien status and making immigration law type enforcement decisions, and achieving the amount of training that would be required to do the job effectively, and so on. So, and often the practices is, if there is a situation where the police officer, at least in Los Angeles, encounters someone who they suspect is an illegal alien, they'll simply hold him and call INS and just let INS deal with it. And that's the extent of their involvement, and there's a lot of resentment, at least that was expressed to me, about having to say things like, are you legal here, show me your immigration papers, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it needs a more, my sense is that it needs a more comprehensive treatment. If we're going to impose any additional duties on local police, we've got to make sure that there's the funding and there's the training that they seem to badly need in order to be able to perform this additional function.
Commissioner, there's one proposal out there that I personally very much support, and I think it comes from the administration, and that is the notion that at least the names of the absconders and the criminal aliens whom the government is seeking ought to be put into the nationwide database, and that we ought to mandate that when local, state, and local authorities bring someone into custody for any reason, such as a traffic stop, and they run the name through the database anyway, that they be mandated to hold the individuals when they get hits. on that database. And it seems to me that would be a very productive step forward. And again, it would not put the state and local police in a position of having to interpret immigration law, for which they may or may not be qualified, but simply mandate them when they get an immigration hit against this database, they have either a criminal alien that we're looking for or one of the absconders for whom there's already a removal order in place, that they be obligated to hold that person for the immigration service. I think that could be done, and I think it would not put the state and local police in the position of having to interpret immigration law.
Yes, I think the issue calls for some subdivision here. There are ways in which we ought to promote more cooperation between local police authorities and the immigration authorities, and there are other ways in which it probably makes sense to have some division of labor there. My fellow panelists have addressed some of those. I think the reason is that from my own conversations with local police authorities, they don't want, they want to encourage cooperation from among all residents of the community to give them information about crime that's going on. If it's believed that they have a mandate that whenever they think even a complaining witness is illegally in the country, they run to the immigration authorities, then that may dry up some of that kind of information. And I don't think we want that. We're not at a point where we need that. On the other hand, there are other very well-designed targeted ways in which better cooperation could work out. The use of the NCIC system for absconders from removal orders is one way. I think if we had a broader, comprehensive policy, which I would favor, to do more about internal enforcement of the immigration laws and beef up those parts of the immigration machinery to be better equipped for that. We give most attention to the border. We should give more attention to interior enforcement. If we did that, then we might find ways to have a more productive interrelationship with the activities of local law enforcement. But there's some very specific initiatives that have been pioneered. For example, arrangements with local jails. As part of their own booking procedures, they will find out whether someone's foreign-born or not. Now, many of those may turn out to be naturalized citizens, but we were working out arrangements when I was at INS to arrange for either INS officers to interview several of those to see if, for the INS to make a determination whether they seem to be in the country illegally, or even better, to arrange for a video hookup so it could be done without INS officers having to spend a lot of travel time to different jail facilities. I think that's a very productive, cooperative way. It focuses on those for whom there's at least probable cause of criminal activity, and it could be advanced. And actually, I would say there's a wide variety of these non-cooperation policies that local municipalities have adopted. Most of them, if you look at the fine print, they do allow for cooperation if there's an indication of criminal activity. So we should address that some more. The Commission could probably make some useful recommendations along those lines. The strong non-cooperation policies go too far, but we should be careful about exactly the forms of cooperation that we design, and they should include careful training and a well-stated agreement about who does what in those circumstances.
That leads to my final question. There have been proposals, in fact, there are half a dozen at least bills lying here in the Congress to approach the problem from a different angle and to legalize and document illegal temporary workers, as to have a regime similar to that in the European community, where you could have everyone that is in the country legally or illegally come and register. They don't become citizens, they don't get green cards, but they get work permits. And by recognizing the force, as you had in your testimony pointed out, of the private companies and the many economic forces that depend on illegal, particularly south of the border, temporary workers, why not recognize the problem, document them, and then allow an INS enforcement activity that doesn't target those that have the political clout behind them and perhaps the not only economic but moral high ground, and that would require significant legislation. Do any of you disagree with that? And if so, do any of you think it's practical?
I disagree with that, Commissioner, for at least two reasons. First of all, I don't think that is going to do anything to solve the problem of illegal immigration into the United States. If anything, it's going to aggravate the problem. It's going to legalize a lot of people here into the infrastructure, kind of the support structure. It's kind of what happened after the '86 amnesty, that suddenly you had a much greater support base in the United States for illegal immigration, that there were people now prepared to receive illegal immigrants openly. And unless something else is done on the enforcement side, plus the fact that it's rewarding people who have gotten in here illegally, and the thought is, well, gosh, maybe we better get in there now so that we can catch the next amnesty that comes along. Secondly, and perhaps more importantly, we have to recognize, having just talked about mandates, the enormous burden that another amnesty program of this sort would place on the Immigration Service, because people have to be qualified in order to participate in this program. And everyone is going to try and get qualified for that program. And someone is going to have to make the yes or no decision as to whether you're qualified or not. We're going to have another wave of lawsuits, as we did after the '86 amnesty, as to who's qualified and who's not, who's been intimidated and who wasn't. So I'm very apprehensive, having talked about how overburdened our immigration services already are, to say, well, let's put one more gigantic burden on them. Let's make them rule on who's qualified for this new benefit or not, in addition to everything else that they're already doing.
There are basically two kinds of proposals that are floating now that would meet the objectives you're talking about. Some of them would have a registration procedure, an adjudication procedure, so that people would get temporary status. It's a kind of guest worker provision, and some sorts of rules for how they would have to go back for at least part of the year to wherever their home country is. Other ones would have a more complete amnesty like we had in 1986, or legalization program, where people would eventually get full lawful permanent resident status. I think we have to be very skeptical about both those as to whether they would really solve the problem. Guest worker programs basically have not worked. The history of them throughout the world is they don't work. If the intention is that this will really make this truly temporary, it doesn't work, at least not without enforcement way beyond what is contemplated in these proposals I've seen or that other countries have really been willing to provide. Now, a broader amnesty in light of for people who have been here for a long time, maybe at some point that would be part of an overall solution. But to me, the real question for those programs is, what kinds of new enforcement measures is that being coupled with? Because you have to have an effective new set of enforcement measures in place to make that sensible, to make sure you don't get in the same soup again a few years later. In fact, maybe the momentum would be increased because people might think, well, this would be the second amnesty in 20-some years. I better get there because maybe there'll be a third one coming down the road. So I think the key is to show that to adopt some carefully thought out, resolute and well-financed techniques to improve interior enforcement. And once we've shown some real progress along those lines, then we might think about amnesty or other kinds of legalization programs as a part of the overall solution there. The problem is most of those are proposed as though there's a static population there. If we take care of that, they'll all be registered, we'll know where they are. It doesn't ever stop there. There will be people coming the next time around, and you have to have something in place where you've thought about what do you do about that next wave of migration.
Thank you very much.